text this morning comes from 2 Kings, chapter 2, verses 1 through 2 and 6 through 14. If you were here last week, you heard the story of Elijah being ready to quit after having been threatened with his life. He's back, and we hear this interesting story of Elijah and Elisha. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elisha took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet, if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not." As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elisha went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in two. He picked up the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and went back and stood at the bank of the Jordan. Then he took the cloak that had fallen from him and struck the water with it. "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" he asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. I invite you to pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So this text this morning is about a prophet, Elijah, who was getting ready to check out, and Elisha, who was checking in. Elijah, who was, as we know in the text, getting ready to take off, and Elisha with the unknowns of his future just right before him. We hear of Elijah who's crossed the Jordan, and Elisha who's getting ready to cross the Jordan for the very first time. These two men, these two voices, this example of follow the leader is an important moment in Israel's history. It's an important moment in the history of faith and God's call on their lives. So we hear this interesting story, this conversation with Elijah and Elisha. Elisha, who is following Elijah, wanting to learn all that he can, and Elijah prompting him to stay put. "Let me go with you." Elijah says, "No, just stay here." But Elisha is just wanting to go, and he follows, and he learns, and he listens, and he sees all the things that happen in the life of Elijah. And it's interesting to note in this text that these 50 men follow at a distance. These wannabe prophets, these ones who learn and listen, they see everything that happens. And Elisha is asked an interesting question by Elijah. "What do you want me to do for you before I'm taken from you?" Interesting question, isn't it? What would our answer be to that question if someone asked of us, "What do you want me to do for you before before I leave? What would our response be to that question? Have you ever thought about that? What do you want me to do? Now, for some of us, it might be, leave us an inheritance, right? Or take out the trash. Or put gas in the car, right? Or make sure there's money in the bank account, or make sure there's something to eat. We can give lots of answers to that. And I would suppose Elisha might have thought of a lot of things, but he said and gave this powerful answer, let me inherit a double portion of your spirit. And Elijah says, boy, you're asking for a difficult thing. But you'll get it. You'll get it if your eyes are open. You'll get it if you follow all the way to the end. You'll get it if you see me depart. And so we hear this story, this verse 11, as they were walking along together, chariots of fire and horses of fire come, and Elijah is taken in a whirlwind into heaven. Only the second person in biblical history not to die. Does anybody know who the other person was? Now somebody should know because we've talked about this in Bible study. How about Enoch? Is that right, Joe? Thank you. Shoot. The only other person never to die. And Elijah is taken in a whirlwind up to heaven, and Elisha cries out, tears his cloak in two, but then picks up the mantle. Now mantles are lots of things. They can be something that weigh us down, and hold us back. But in this case, it was this garment that fell off Elijah, of course on purpose, and Elisha picks it up and strikes the Jordan with it again. And what happens? The Jordan is parted on the left and the right, and Elisha walks through it. Certainly God has blessed him with this gift of the Spirit. Now what does this mean for us? This gift of the Spirit, this double-edged thing that might happen to you and I. What's God calling us to in the midst of this text? There are a couple of things I think that are important. Elijah, in the beginning part of this text, 3 different times says to Elisha, no, you just stay here. There are things I must do. You just stay put in this place. Sometimes the safest thing for us to do is to stay put, isn't it? You ever like to take the safe route and just stay put? It would have been much safer for the 8 of us not to go to Tennessee last week. Because, well, it's not a bad trip on I-75 until you get to 92, is that right? When you turn on 92, and it's 4 lanes for a short time, and then all of a sudden, and Randy and Rod can attest to this, all of a sudden it goes from a road this wide to a road that wide. And the other thing that happens, I don't know if it happened to Randy or not, but the other thing that happens is it loses you on your GPS. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm driving along and my GPS suddenly shows me out in the middle of a field somewhere, I get nervous. And I kept waiting and waiting for my car that was over here to be over here. And finally it was, and then we turned left on 27, which is not a bad drive, and then we turned right on 329. Come on, Chuck, help me out. He doesn't remember. We've heard those words before. There was another road. There was another road. But here's what happens. You make this turn, and then all of a sudden, what you know about driving goes out the window. Because every get there. Well, Chuck kept saying something, Pam, about we'll be there pretty soon, or it can't be much longer. Is that what he said in your card? Almost there. Don't you like that answer? Almost there. And we actually didn't arrive at the place because my GPS had it 3/10 of a mile down the road farther. So we were flying by where we were supposed to stay. It would have been much safer just to stay home. Because we went into some vast unknowns. People we didn't know, a place we weren't sure where we were going to stay. We weren't sure who was going to join us along the way, and what jobs we were going to do, and who our leaders were. But at the end of the week, that journey from where we stayed back to 27, that journey that seemed like forever on Sunday, was 5 minutes on the way home. Not literally, but you know how that works, right? It seemed like, I wish Joy was here, it seemed like those curves straightened out every time we drove. Familiarity does that to you, doesn't it? And we worked together, and we laughed together, and we prayed together, and we sang. At least I sang. For me, everything has a song. You know, even if it's not right, everything has a song. Sometimes, though, we think it's safer just to stay in one place. Elijah said, just stay here. Just stay here, and I'll be back. Had Elisha stayed where he was, he would have missed the opportunity to pick up the mantle and be the next prophet who was an important cog in the future of the history of Israel. For you and I, you see, sometimes I get it. It's easier to stay in one place. But sometimes the real call to us in the church is the call to move on. We can stay where we are, or we can cross the Jordan. We can ask for a double portion of God's Spirit, or we can listen to everything that tells us to stand still. We can be bogged down by what we already know, or we can be pushed forward with what we don't know, what we don't understand. And I think that's God's call to us, not only as the church, as the body of Christ, but individually. Because stepping out in faith, hearing God's call, responding to it, sometimes involves great risk. What would it look like for you and I if we were to take the step forward that Elisha took? You see, I'm convinced we already have. Like I talked to the kids about in Follow the Leader. Someone, for all of you, was the leader. Right? When you were a kid, I can tell you every one of my Sunday school teachers' names. I can see their faces. They were important parts of my life. I can tell you the directors at church camp when Camp Wesley, when I was a third grader at Camp Wesley in Belfast, and the impact they had on my life. They took up the mantle, and they took it seriously, and they lived faithful lives because of that. And they passed that on to me. And you all had the same experience, right? People influential in your faith, in your life's journey, in teaching you to do certain things. And you've been those persons in this place who picked up the mantle, who've passed it on to people who are now leaders. I bet Marie could give us lots of names of lots of people who are little kids, who are now leaders in this church. And we're called to pick up the mantle of faith. We had Lexi and Macy with us this week. They're 14, going on 40, or maybe 20. Maybe 20. At least that's what they think. And boy, they were pretty unsure might still be unsure. I don't know. They're pretty unsure. But boy, those two girls, we got to the mission site, and they got over their bit of apprehension. I have some great pictures of them. They worked. Lexi had never pounded a nail in her life. And that night, when we gathered together, we were doing a debriefing kind of thing. How did today go? Lexi said, I pounded my first nail ever. Now, for you, those of you who pounded hundreds of thousands of nails, is not a big deal, I suppose. But for a 14-year-old girl to say, I pounded my first nail. You see, what happened was she could have stayed home. But we picked up the mantle. She pounded that nail, and it was significant in her life. And Macy, on the last day, we snapped a chalk line, and she put in every screw that required to go down the ramp. Every single one in the middle. Without a word. We snapped the chalk line, she got the drill and the screws, and it was zoomed right down the middle. You see, the mantle of faith that we are called to pick up and pass to each other is a significant one. But it hasn't stopped. You see, I think this is where our greatest challenge is. See, we've got the mantle now. It's ours. This mantle of faith, this mantle that is St. Paul's United Church of Christ, it belongs to all of us. And we can choose to stay in one place, or we can choose to pick it up and to strike the Jordan, strike the future, have it part on the right and the left, and walk through on dry ground. Or we can choose to stay back. This mission site Morgan Scout project holds about 20 people, give or take. I think somewhere in 18 to 20 people. Next year when we go, because we're going to go next year. Next year when we go, we want to fill that place with people from St. Paul's. 18 or 20 people. We think we can. We want you to go. Not because there's not work to do here, but because there is. Not because we can go closer to home, because I suppose we could. But because in that place, we pick up the mantle of faith and we work together. Something happens. So friends, the story that's ours, the story of faith, the story of St. Paul's, the story of being faithful Christians, it belongs to each of us. It belongs to each of us. Might we have the courage to pick up the mantle and to live faithfully with all that God's given us. Let us pray. Thank you, God, for calling us to be your people. Thank you for Elijah and Elisha, who are leader and follower and leader, who picked up the mantle of faith, who asked for a double dose of the Spirit, and your response to them, God. Might we have the courage in this place to pick up the mantle of faith? Individually, together. God, help us to pick it up. Help us to respond.